Black soldier rejected from first class. Her comeback will shock you. The roar of the Boeing 747's engines was a familiar lullaby to Captain Zara Adebayo. She had grown accustomed to the metallic symphony of flight, the gentle turbulence, a rocking chair in the sky. This flight, however, was different. This was a homecoming. Zara, adorned in her dress blues, felt a knot of anticipation tighten in her chest. She had spent the last year stationed in the unforgiving deserts of the Middle East. As a combat medic, she had witnessed the fragility of life, the indiscriminate wrath of war. She was returning home a decorated soldier, her chest adorned with medals that whispered tales of courage and sacrifice. This journey home, she realized, was not just hers alone, it was a pilgrimage for peace. The plane touched down with a gentle thud, snapping Zara out of her reverie. As she disembarked, her eyes scanned the bustling arrival terminal. She spotted her grandmother, Mama Efe, standing near the baggage claim. Zara rushed towards her, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions. She embraced her grandmother tightly, the familiar scent of Mama Ife's lavender perfume enveloping her. Mama Ife's eyes scanned Zara's uniform, lingering on each medal with pride and concern. She gently traced the outline of the Bronze Star. Zara nodded, unable to articulate the depths of her experiences. She was eager to shed the weight of her uniform, to be simply Zara once more. The scars of war ran deep, invisible but ever-present. The drive back to Mama Ife's home was filled with a comfortable silence, punctuated by snippets of conversation. Zara shared anecdotes about her time overseas, focusing on camaraderie and humor. Mama Ife listened intently, her face etched with pride and heartache. As they approached Mama Ife's home, Zara felt a wave of nostalgia. She remembered childhood summers, learning family history. "Grandma," Zara began, "remember when I wanted to be a doctor?" Mama Ife chuckled. "You were always determined," Zara smiled. "I may not be a doctor, but I'm honoring that dream." She shared her plans to enroll in a nursing program. Mama Ife nodded. "You have always had a heart for service, Zara." Zara stood in line at the airport check-in counter, her heart heavy with anticipation and dread. She was flying to Atlanta for a medical conference, a pivotal step towards her future. Her eyes fell on the first-class check-in line. It moved leisurely, a stark contrast to the crowded economy line. She observed the passengers, their designer luggage, their air of effortless privilege. Weary from years of sacrifice, she yearned for a taste of that comfort. She recalled the airline miles accumulated during her deployment. With determination, Zara approached the first-class counter. She presented her military ID and ticket, her voice barely a whisper. Zara held her breath, a flicker of hope igniting within her. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the attendant said, her voice devoid of any real apology, "but there seems to be an issue with your ticket. It appears you're booked in economy class." Zara's heart sank. She had meticulously checked and double-checked her reservation, the confirmation email a beacon of hope amidst the chaos of her impending departure. "But I used my miles," Zara insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "I upgraded to first class." The attendant sighed impatiently. "I'm afraid there's no record of an upgrade," she said, her tone clipped and dismissive. "Perhaps you're mistaken." Zara felt a familiar surge of anger rising within her, a potent cocktail of frustration and humiliation. She had encountered this dismissive attitude before, the subtle yet unmistakable air of disbelief, the implication that a young black woman in uniform couldn't possibly be deserving of first-class treatment. "I have the confirmation email right here." She reached for her phone, her fingers fumbling as she scrolled through her inbox, the weight of the attendant's skeptical gaze pressing down on her. The air around her seemed to crackle with tension, the once familiar airport terminal suddenly morphing into a battleground of microaggressions and thinly veiled prejudice. She found the email, her heart pounding in her chest, and thrust her phone towards the attendant, her finger jabbing at the screen. "See," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and exhaustion, "I told you I'm not lying." The attendant took the phone, her perfectly manicured fingernail tapping impatiently against the screen. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, but it was gone quickly. "Well," she said, "it seems there's been a mix-up. First class is fully booked." Zara felt a wave of despair wash over her. Even after all she had endured, she was still relegated to the back. The attendant cut her off, her tone brooking no argument. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other passengers to assist." Zara stood there, frozen in place, her body buzzing with anger and exhaustion. As she gathered her belongings, her eyes met those of a young black man, his face etched with sympathy. He offered her a small knowing nod, a silent acknowledgement of the shared experience. The terminal buzzed with the usual cacophony of announcements and conversations. As Zara made her way through the crowd, the impending confrontation gnawed at her resolve. Approaching the first-class check-in counter, she felt a flicker of hope. She presented her military ID and upgraded ticket with a smile. The attendant barely glanced at her. Instead, she scrutinized Zara's documents with a skeptical frown. "We don't have any record of an upgrade," she said flatly. Zara's heart sank. "I have the confirmation email," Zara insisted, her voice wavering. The attendant's indifferent expression didn't change as she typed. "There's clearly been a mistake," Zara said firmly. "I deserve this seat." Passengers in the line began to murmur amongst themselves, their eyes flicking between Zara and the attendant. Some looked annoyed at the delay, while others seemed to watch with silent curiosity. Zara could feel the weight of their gazes pressing down on her, the collective judgment of strangers adding to the already heavy burden on her shoulders. An elderly couple nearby exchanged concerned glances, their whispers barely audible over the din of the terminal. The man's eyes softened as he looked at Zara, perhaps recognizing the determination and frustration in her stance. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers returning from war, carrying invisible scars that the world often chose to ignore. A young mother with a toddler balanced on her hip watched the scene unfold with a mixture of sympathy and helplessness. She shifted her weight, trying to keep her restless child entertained while casting furtive glances at Zara. The child, oblivious to the tension, reached out toward Zara with a curious look, momentarily breaking the invisible barrier between them. The businessman behind Zara checked his watch impatiently, huffing in frustration. His expensive suit and briefcase marked him as a frequent traveler, someone accustomed to the privileges of first-class travel. He looked at Zara with a mixture of irritation and indifference, more concerned with his own inconvenience than the injustice occurring before him. As the moments dragged on, Zara felt a surge of emotions welling up inside her. The sting of humiliation, the burning anger, and the deep-seated frustration of being dismissed and undermined yet again. Each emotion intertwined, forming a knot in her chest that tightened with every passing second. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had faced enemy fire, treated gravely injured soldiers, and survived the horrors of war. Yet this moment, this seemingly mundane interaction, felt like an insurmountable battle. The injustice of it all gnawed at her, threatening to break through her composed exterior. She couldn't let this moment define her, but the weight of the unfairness was hard to bear. Zara's thoughts raced back to her time in the desert, the camaraderie of her unit, the shared hardships, and the bond that had formed in the crucible of war. They had fought together, bled together, cried together. In those moments, her worth was unquestioned. Here, in the sterile environment of an airport, her value was reduced to the skepticism of an indifferent attendant. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into the palms of her hands. She could feel the eyes of the passengers on her, their judgment palpable. But there was also a flicker of something else: empathy, understanding, solidarity. It was subtle, but it was there, a reminder that not everyone saw her as less than. She drew strength from that, from the small nods and sympathetic glances. The air between Zara and the attendant crackled with tension. Zara's voice, though steady, carried the weight of her determination. "I have my confirmation email right here," she said, holding up her phone. The attendant sighed, her fingers tapping irritably against the counter as she took the phone from Zara and examined the screen. "There's clearly been a mistake," Zara repeated, her eyes never leaving the attendant's face. "I deserve this seat. I've earned it." Her voice grew stronger with each word, a reflection of the inner resolve that had seen her through so many battles. She refused to be dismissed, to be treated as though her sacrifices meant nothing. The attendant's eyes flicked back and forth between the screen and the computer, her expression unreadable. "I'm afraid first class is fully booked," she said finally, her voice devoid of any real empathy. "There's nothing I can do." The dismissal in her tone was like a slap in the face, a reminder of the countless times Zara had been made to feel invisible. Zara's frustration boiled over. "You can't just dismiss me like this," she said, her voice rising. "I've given everything for this country. I've earned this seat." Her words hung in the air, a challenge that demanded a response. The attendant looked taken aback, her composure faltering for a brief moment before she regained her professional veneer. Section 5. The Silent Observers. The terminal seemed to hold its breath, the confrontation drawing the attention of everyone within earshot. Passengers who had been focused on their own journeys paused to watch, their expressions a mix of curiosity and empathy. The elderly couple exchanged a look of shared understanding, their eyes meeting Zara's with silent support. A group of young adults, likely college students, whispered among themselves, their faces reflecting a mix of admiration and frustration on Zara's behalf. They had grown up in a world that preached equality, yet they were witnessing firsthand the gap between ideals and reality. Their murmurs grew louder, a chorus of discontent that added to the charged atmosphere. The young mother shifted her weight, her toddler now reaching out towards Zara with innocent curiosity. She offered Zara an apologetic smile as if to say, "I see you. I understand." It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. In that moment, Zara felt a flicker of hope, a reminder that not everyone was indifferent to her struggle. The businessman, however, remained impatient, his eyes fixed on his watch. He tapped his foot, his frustration evident in every motion. To him, this was a delay, an inconvenience. He failed to see the larger picture, the fight for dignity and respect playing out before him. His indifference was a stark contrast to the growing empathy around him. Section 6. A Veteran's Anguish. Zara's mind raced as she stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had fought so hard, sacrificed so much, and yet here she was, battling for something as simple as a seat. The injustice of it all gnawed at her, a constant reminder of the systemic biases that she had faced her entire life. She thought of her comrades, those who had not made it back, those who had given everything for a country that still struggled to see their worth. She thought of her grandmother, the lessons of resilience and dignity that had been instilled in her from a young age. She had promised herself that she would fight for a better future, not just for herself, but for those who came after her. Her chest tightened with a mix of anger and sadness. The invisible scars of war were easier to bear than the visible scars of discrimination. Every slight, every dismissal was a reminder of a battle that was far from over. But she refused to give up. She had faced down death. She could face down this injustice. As she stood there, her mind filled with memories of the battlefield, she drew strength from those experiences. She had survived worse. She had overcome greater odds. This too was a battle she would face head-on. She straightened her shoulders, her resolve hardening into something unbreakable. Section 7. A Chance Encounter. Just as Zara was about to speak again, a voice interrupted the tense standoff. "Excuse me, miss," a calm, authoritative voice said from behind her. Zara turned to see a man in a pilot's uniform approaching. His presence seemed to command respect, the crowd parting slightly to let him through. He looked at Zara, his eyes filled with understanding. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said, his voice steady. "I'm Captain Reynolds. May I see that email?" Zara handed him her phone, her heart pounding. The pilot glanced at the screen, then back at the attendant. "It appears there's been a mistake," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This young lady is clearly entitled to her first-class seat." The attendant's demeanor changed instantly, her professional mask slipping. "Of course, Captain," she said, her voice suddenly accommodating. "I'll see what I can do." She typed furiously on her keyboard, the tension in the air beginning to dissipate. Zara watched in silence, her emotions a whirlwind of relief, gratitude, and lingering frustration. Captain Reynolds looked at Zara, his expression softening. "Thank you for your service," he said quietly. "You deserve this." Zara nodded, a lump forming in her throat. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt seen, acknowledged. The crowd began to disperse, the moment of confrontation giving way to a sense of resolution. Captain Reynolds' words hung in the air, a beacon of reason in the midst of the brewing storm. The attendant, visibly flustered by the pilot's unexpected intervention, fumbled with her keyboard, her perfectly manicured nails clicking a frantic rhythm against the keys. Zara, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and apprehension, watched the scene unfold, her gaze fixed on the interplay between authority and defiance. "Let me just check the system again," the attendant stammered, her voice losing its earlier edge of indifference. "There might have been a technical error." She averted her gaze from Captain Reynolds' steady stare, her fingers now dancing across the keyboard with a newfound urgency. The crowd, sensing a shift in the power dynamic, began to murmur amongst themselves, their whispers a mix of anticipation and skepticism. Zara, despite her lingering frustration, felt a glimmer of hope ignite within her. The pilot's unwavering support, his quiet assertion of her worth, had shifted the energy of the encounter. It was a subtle but significant victory, a reminder that even in the face of systemic bias, individual acts of courage and compassion could make a difference. She drew strength from the silent support of the passengers around her, their gazes a tangible expression of solidarity. The elderly couple, their faces etched with concern, offered her a warm smile, their wrinkled hands clasped together as if in prayer. The young mother, her toddler still perched on her hip, nodded encouragingly, her eyes conveying a silent message of understanding. Minutes stretched into an eternity as the attendant continued to tap away at her keyboard, her brow furrowed in concentration. The silence in the terminal was broken only by the rhythmic clatter of keys and the muffled announcements echoing from the departure gates. Zara, her patience wearing thin, felt a familiar surge of frustration rising within her. "Is there a problem?" Captain Reynolds inquired, his voice calm but firm, his gaze unwavering. The attendant, startled by his question, looked up from her computer screen, her expression a mixture of annoyance and resignation. "I'm afraid the system is showing no availability in first class," she replied, her voice laced with a hint of triumph. "That's impossible!" Zara interjected, her voice rising in frustration. "I booked this flight weeks ago, and I used my miles to upgrade. I have the confirmation email right here." She thrust her phone towards the attendant, her finger jabbing at the screen, her patience wearing thin. The attendant sighed dramatically, her carefully constructed facade of professionalism crumbling under the weight of the pilot's scrutiny. "I understand your frustration, ma'am," she said, her tone condescending. "But unfortunately there's nothing I can do. The system is the system." Her words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the bureaucratic walls that often stood between marginalized communities and equal treatment. Captain Reynolds, his expression unreadable, took a step closer to the counter, his presence commanding attention. The air crackled with tension as he addressed the attendant, his voice low but firm. "I've been a pilot for over 20 years, he began, his gaze unwavering. "Systems, while seemingly infallible, are often flawed." Captain Reynolds raised a hand, silencing her protest. "This young lady has served our country with honor and distinction." The crowd erupted in applause. The elderly couple nodded their approval. The young mother offered Zara a thumbs up. Zara met Captain Reynolds' gaze, her eyes conveying thanks. She felt seen, heard, valued. The attendant, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment, glared at Captain Reynolds, her lips pressed together in a thin, bloodless line. She knew she couldn't openly challenge his authority, not with the entire terminal now seemingly invested in the outcome of this unexpected confrontation. She glanced around, her eyes searching for a way out of this increasingly uncomfortable situation. "Look," she began, her voice losing its earlier veneer of professionalism, her tone bordering on petulant. "I understand that you're trying to advocate for this passenger, but my hands are tied. The system clearly states that there are no seats available in first class. I can't just magically conjure up a seat out of thin air." Captain Reynolds, unfazed by the attendant's thinly veiled attempt to regain control of the situation, leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper above the din of the terminal. "I'm not asking you to perform magic," he said, his tone firm but respectful. "I'm simply asking you to do your job, to explore all possible solutions before resorting to bureaucratic excuses." The attendant, her frustration mounting, opened her mouth to retort, but before she could utter a word, a voice from behind her interrupted. "What seems to be the problem here, Janice?" A tall, imposing man, his suit impeccably tailored, his expression a mask of controlled annoyance, strode towards the counter, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd with an air of disdain. The arrival of the newcomer, presumably a supervisor, shifted the dynamics of the situation. The crowd pressed closer, their collective gaze fixed on the unfolding drama. Zara stood her ground, her resolve unwavering. Mr. Thompson listened intently as the attendant recounted the events. Captain Reynolds gently placed a hand on Zara's arm, a silent plea for patience. "Mr. Thompson," the captain began, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. This young lady, Captain Adebayo, is a decorated veteran returning home. She used her hard-earned miles to upgrade her ticket to first class. We have the confirmation email right here." He held up Zara's phone, displaying the proof of her rightful claim. Mr. Thompson took the phone, scanning the email with efficiency. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, replaced by a neutral mask. He handed the phone back to the captain, his gaze settling on Zara. A hush fell over the terminal as Mr. Thompson, his face an impassive mask, surveyed the scene before him. The air crackled with tension, the silence punctuated by the distant rumble of an airplane taxiing on the runway. Passengers on their way to other gates had paused, their curiosity piqued by the unusual standoff between a decorated soldier, a determined pilot, and an increasingly flustered airline staff. "I understand that Captain Adebayo is frustrated," Mr. Thompson finally said, his voice smooth and controlled, "but unfortunately, our system shows no record of a first-class upgrade for this flight. As you know, these upgrades are subject to availability." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd, gauging their reaction. Before he could continue, a voice rang out from the back of the crowd. "That's not right!" An elderly man, his face weathered with time, his eyes filled with a quiet anger, stepped forward. "I was standing right here, and I heard this young lady tell the attendant that she had used her miles for an upgrade. She even showed her confirmation email." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, heads nodded and voices rose in support of the elderly man's statement. The young mother, emboldened by the collective display of solidarity, spoke up, her voice clear and firm. "I saw it too. She even showed her military ID. It's not fair to treat her like this, not after everything she's done for our country." Section 7. Justice Delayed. Mr. Thompson, his carefully constructed facade of indifference crumbling under the weight of the crowd's collective disapproval, shifted uncomfortably from one foot to the other. The unexpected outpouring of support for Zara, the growing murmurs of discontent, threatened to escalate the situation beyond his control. He glanced nervously towards the departure gates, his gaze seeking out the reassuring presence of airport security. "Look," he began, his voice losing its earlier smoothness, his tone laced with a hint of desperation. "I understand your concerns, but there's really nothing I can do. The system is clear. There are no seats available in first class." He paused, his eyes darting from Zara to Captain Reynolds, his expression pleading for understanding. "However," he continued, his voice regaining a semblance of composure, "as a gesture of goodwill, and in recognition of Captain Adebayo's service to our country, we would be happy to offer her a complimentary upgrade on her next flight." He forced a smile, hoping his offer would appease the crowd and bring an end to the increasingly uncomfortable standoff. Zara, her frustration reaching its boiling point, stared at Mr. Thompson, her eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and disbelief. A complimentary upgrade on her next flight? As if that could erase the humiliation, the injustice of being denied her rightful seat, of having her service and sacrifice dismissed with a wave of a hand and a bureaucratic excuse. A complimentary upgrade? Zara finally spoke, her voice laced with quiet fury. "Is that supposed to make up for this humiliation?" She stepped closer, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "I didn't serve my country to be placated with empty gestures. I served to protect the ideals of equality and justice." She met Mr. Thompson's gaze, her eyes blazing. "Keep your complimentary upgrade," she said, her voice laced with quiet dignity. "I'd rather stand here in the back of the line." She turned on her heel, her head held high, and walked towards the economy check-in counter. A hush fell over the terminal as Zara, her steps echoing on the polished floor, made her way towards the economy line. The initial shock of her refusal reverberated through the crowd. Slowly a wave of applause broke out, swelling into a thunderous ovation. Strangers nodded their approval, their applause a symphony of solidarity. The collective energy of the terminal had shifted, transformed by Zara's quiet act of defiance. Surrounded by a sea of unfamiliar faces, she realized she was not alone. Captain Reynolds, standing near the first-class counter, watched Zara's retreating figure with a mixture of pride and admiration. He had witnessed countless acts of bravery during his years of service, but Zara's quiet courage struck a chord deep within him. She had faced down injustice with a grace and dignity that commanded respect. Mr. Thompson, the airport supervisor, was clearly out of his depth. The crowd's support for Zara shifted the balance of power. Captain Reynolds knew he could walk away, but something held him back. He had a choice to make, a choice that would test his commitment to his ideals. With a deep breath, Captain Reynolds turned away, his mind made up. As the applause for Zara reverberated through the terminal, a young woman standing near the back of the economy line felt a surge of emotion. She had watched the entire encounter unfold, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger, frustration, and hope. She had experienced similar situations before, subtle acts of discrimination, dismissive glances. But Zara's courageous stand had awakened something within her, a sense of outrage and a yearning for change. She glanced around, meeting the eyes of other passengers, united in admiration for Zara's defiance. With a deep breath, she stepped out of line, her heart pounding with resolve. She approached Zara, her hand outstretched, a shy smile spreading across her face. Zara, her steps lighter now, paused as she felt a gentle touch on her arm. She turned to see a young woman, her hand outstretched. "Hi," the young woman began, her voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted to say that was amazing." She blushed, her grip on Zara's arm tightening. Zara offered her a warm smile. "Thank you," she replied, her voice filled with gratitude. "It means a lot to know that I'm not alone." A commotion near the first-class counter drew her attention. Captain Reynolds strode towards her, his face determined. "Captain Adebayo," he said, "a word, if you please." A collective gasp rippled through the terminal as Captain Reynolds, his words echoing in the sudden silence, escorted Zara back towards the first-class counter. Passengers craned their necks, their faces a mixture of curiosity and anticipation, eager to witness the resolution of this unexpected drama. The airport staff, their earlier indifference replaced by a mixture of apprehension and grudging respect, watched the procession with a newfound attentiveness. Mr. Thompson, his face pale, his composure shattered, stood frozen behind the counter, his eyes darting between Captain Reynolds, Zara, and the expectant crowd. He had dealt with countless disgruntled passengers, navigated the complexities of airline regulations, and emerged from these encounters relatively unscathed. But this was different. This was about more than just a seat on a plane. This was about the very essence of human dignity and the consequences of its denial. Captain Reynolds, his hand resting lightly on Zara's elbow, guided her to the counter, his gaze never leaving Mr. Thompson's. "I trust we've reached a mutual understanding of the situation," he said, his voice calm but firm, his words leaving no room for misinterpretation. "Yes, of course, Captain," Mr. Thompson stammered, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes darting towards the silent crowd, seeking a way out of the spotlight that had unexpectedly been thrust upon him. "I've reevaluated the situation, and I'm happy to confirm that we do in fact have one seat available in first class." The tension in the air dissipated as Mr. Thompson confirmed the availability of a first-class seat. The crowd erupted in applause, a testament to the power of collective action. Zara met Captain Reynolds' gaze, her eyes conveying gratitude. She had stood her ground and emerged with her dignity intact. The captain's unwavering support had touched her heart. "Thank you, Captain," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He had restored her faith in the power of individuals to make a difference. Captain Reynolds nodded, his face softening into a rare smile. As Zara, her first-class boarding pass in hand, turned towards the gate, she paused, her gaze sweeping over the applauding crowd. The terminal had transformed into a space of shared humanity, a testament to collective action and the belief in a more just world. She saw herself reflected in the eyes of strangers, their faces a tapestry of different backgrounds, yet united by a shared sense of purpose. The elderly couple, the young mother, the businessman, they had all witnessed her struggle and triumph. Zara realized that the true meaning of first class extended beyond plush seats and champagne. It was about recognizing the inherent dignity of every individual, regardless of race, gender, or social standing. It was about treating each other with respect, empathy, and compassion. With a newfound sense of purpose, Zara walked towards her gate, her head held high. She knew the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but she also knew she would face them with the support of a community that believed in justice, equality, and the strength of the human spirit. The gate attendant, her smile strained yet professional, scanned Zara's boarding pass, her eyes lingering on the first-class designation. The events of the past hour had clearly reached her station, casting a shadow over the boarding process. "Welcome aboard, Captain Adebayo," the attendant said, her voice neutral, her gaze shifting from Zara's face to the crowd. The applause, though subdued, followed Zara as she walked down the jet bridge, a reminder of the collective support that had buoyed her spirits. Zara, her steps lighter, her heart filled with purpose, acknowledged the applause with a nod. She saw a reflection of her own experiences in their faces, a silent acknowledgement of the invisible battles fought daily. As she stepped onto the plane, the flight attendant greeted Zara with genuine warmth. "Good evening, Captain," she said, "and welcome to first class. May I show you to your seat?" Zara settled into the plush leather seat, her body sinking into the luxurious embrace of first-class comfort. The spacious legroom, the gentle hum of the air conditioning, the attentive gaze of the flight attendant offering a pre-flight beverage, these were the trappings of privilege. Yet, as she adjusted her seatbelt and gazed out the window, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within her. The events of the past hour had transformed this journey into a profound, personal experience. She thought of the countless times she had boarded planes in uniform, her sacrifices often met with indifference. This time felt different. Her presence in first class was a testament to the power of speaking truth to power, of standing firm in one's principles. As the plane taxied towards the runway, Zara closed her eyes, her fingers tracing the contours of the medals pinned to her uniform. Each medal told a story of courage, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication to duty, resonating with the strangers in the terminal. The soft chime signaling the end of the flight safety demonstration broke Zara's reverie. As she glanced around the cabin, her eyes met those of a fellow passenger, an elderly gentleman with a shock of silver hair and twinkling eyes. "Quite a scene back there in the terminal," the gentleman remarked, his voice a low rumble. "You handled yourself with remarkable grace and dignity." Zara, caught off guard, offered a warm smile. "Thank you," she replied. "It wasn't easy, but it was important to stand up for what I believe in." The gentleman nodded, his gaze lingering on Zara's uniform. "A rare quality these days," he said, "the courage to speak truth to power." Zara felt a connection with the gentleman, a shared understanding of the importance of standing up for one's beliefs. Their conversation continued, a meeting of minds and experiences across generations. And so began an unexpected conversation, a meeting of minds and experiences. Zara learned that her fellow passenger, a retired history professor named Mr. Hawthorne, had dedicated his life to studying social justice movements. Mr. Hawthorne listened with rapt attention as Zara shared her own experiences, the challenges of navigating a world resistant to change. "It's not always about grand gestures," Zara mused. "Sometimes it's about the small acts of resistance." Mr. Hawthorne nodded, his eyes twinkling with wisdom. "Indeed," he replied, "for it is in these moments that the seeds of lasting change are sown." Their conversation continued, a dialogue that bridged the gap between generations and backgrounds. Zara felt a sense of connection, a shared purpose with Mr. Hawthorne. The flight, once a mundane journey, had become a profound experience of shared humanity. Zara realized that her victory extended beyond the confines of this flight. It was about inspiring others to find their own voices and challenge the injustices they encountered. As the plane soared higher, leaving behind the city lights, Zara felt a sense of peace settle over her. The first-class amenities paled in comparison to the connection she had forged with Mr. Hawthorne. She realized that her victory extended far beyond this moment. It was about the countless others who had witnessed her stand and felt a flicker of recognition in her struggle. The seeds of change had been sown in the hearts of those who had applauded her courage. For every voice raised in support, there were countless others listening, absorbing, questioning the status quo. As the plane continued its journey, Zara felt she was no longer just a passenger, but a participant in a larger journey towards a more just world. A world where the true meaning of first class extended beyond privilege and encompassed the dignity of every human being. Zara felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face the challenges ahead. The gentle hum of the airplane's engines faded as Zara settled deeper into her seat. The warmth of the cabin and the soft glow of the reading lights created an atmosphere of tranquility. Yet the turbulence within her hadn't fully subsided. It had been replaced by quiet introspection, a deep contemplation of the events that had led her to this moment. Looking out the window, she realized her fight for a first-class seat had evolved into something far more profound. It had become a testament to the power of resilience and quiet dignity. The encounter had revealed the raw nerves of prejudice that still pulsed beneath the surface of everyday interactions. The airport had become a battleground for her dignity. The initial sting of being dismissed had ignited a fire within her. Instead of succumbing, she had chosen to fight for every individual who had ever been made to feel less than. The outpouring of support from strangers had restored her faith in humanity. Zara felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to continue her fight for justice and equality. Zara thought about Mr. Hawthorne and his words about the power of individual acts of resistance. He had spoken of Rosa Parks, Harvey Milk, and others who had sparked movements that reshaped society. Their stories served as reminders that change, however incremental, was always possible. The encounter at the airport had been her own small act of resistance. She had drawn strength from the righteousness of her cause and the knowledge that her actions could inspire others. The young woman who had approached her at the gate was a testament to that power. In that brief exchange, Zara had witnessed the transformative potential of courage. She realized that her journey had prepared her for this moment. The battlefield had tested her limits, instilling in her an unwavering resilience. Those lessons had transcended conflict, providing her with the strength to confront injustice. Zara felt ready to continue her fight for a more just and equitable world. Zara knew the journey towards a more just world was far from over. The events at the airport were but a small step on a longer path. The fight for equality was woven into everyday life, playing out in classrooms, courtrooms, and boardrooms. She thought about her aspirations to pursue a career in nursing. Her calling extended beyond the walls of a hospital. Her mission was to be an agent of change, to challenge injustice wherever she encountered it. The uniform she wore was but an outer garment. The true measure of her character lay in her actions and commitment to justice, equality, and compassion. Those ideals transcended race, gender, and social status, uniting humanity in a shared pursuit of a better tomorrow. As the plane approached its destination, Zara felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was determined to keep fighting for a world where every individual had the opportunity to thrive. The wheels of the plane touched down, bringing Zara's journey to a close. As she disembarked, the events at the airport now seemed imbued with a sense of grace. She had entered the terminal as a weary traveler, her spirit weighed down by prejudice and indifference. She emerged transformed, her heart lighter, her resolve strengthened by the support she had received. The first-class seat had become a testament to the power of speaking truth to power. It was a victory for every individual who had ever dared to challenge the status quo. Zara knew her story would continue to inspire others long after this flight. It would serve as a reminder that the human spirit, fueled by justice and equality, had the power to triumph. As Zara walked towards the baggage claim, her steps lighter, she carried with her the collective stories of countless others. Their legacies would continue to guide her, reminding her that the fight for justice was a journey without end.